Hi, my name is Eric Kazanjian, and I'm a fourth-year medical student at the Quinnipiac University Frank Netter School of Medicine. In this video series, I'll be interviewing individuals who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, as well as their caregivers on what it's like to live with this disease and how their lives have changed because of it. The purpose of these videos is to give these individuals a platform to make their voices heard, to educate the public, and to reduce stigma surrounding Alzheimer's. I've also interviewed two healthcare professionals to get their unique perspectives on the challenges of caring for those living with this disease. And lastly, I've included some resources on the channel, which I hope may be helpful if you, a family member, or a friend has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy.
My name is Esther Pearl, and I was caregiver for my husband, Mark. I have a picture of him right here, picture of us. He was diagnosed with atypical younger onset when he was 56 years old, and it was a year after we had gotten married. So quite a surprise to me that that's what the diagnosis was. I shared the story with you earlier in a previous conversation about getting the call from the local doctor after he had had a lumbar puncture. And the doctor called me to say that the results were abnormal. And I said, well, I don't really know what that means. And the response was, well, there's too much protein. And I said, I'm not a doctor. I don't know what that means. What are you saying? And he said, well, I think the doctor in Boston was correct that I'm sorry, okay, so are you telling me it was Alzheimer's? And finally he said, yes, I am. I'm sorry. And I said, okay, but what do I do? And the response was, well, call the office and I'll see you in a year. I said, no, doctor, that's not what I mean. I mean, what do I do? I don't know what to do. You're telling me my husband has a fatal degenerative disease. What do I do? And the response again was, well, I can have the secretary call you and set up an appointment for a year. And I firmly said, no, doctor, you're not understanding my question. What do I do? I don't know what to do. And so I was really left with nothing. I had no idea what to do. And about 2 weeks after that, I was at a work event. It was a health fair for a company. And I was there representing the organization I worked for at the time. And across the room, I saw a table that had the purple tablecloth of the Alzheimer's Association. And all day I was looking at the woman at the table and thinking, oh, I should go over there and talk to her. But it was very new. It was only a couple of weeks after the diagnosis. And my emotions were very, very raw. And I remember thinking, I just don't want to be crying here. This is work and I don't want to be bawling. It's not really appropriate. I'm not an employee here. But eventually I walked my way over, and the very nice woman behind the table came over and said, how are you? Can I help you with anything? Do you have questions? What can I help you with? And I sort of stopped her and I said, my husband was just diagnosed and I don't know what to do. I don't know anything. And I can't really talk about it because I'm just going to start crying. And I really don't want to be crying right now. I said, that's okay. Here's my card. Here's a brochure. When you're ready, I want you to call me. And that was my introduction to the Alzheimer's Association. And so we were able to attend a support group, and Mark got involved with several early stage social engagement programs, which were just a lifesaver. We had a support group that we stayed together for many years, just sort of continuing after the group sort of formally ended, as that support for each other to be able to talk about things that we were experiencing and to talk with people who were going through something very similar. Different because everybody's journey is different, but some of the similar challenges and, thoughts and ideas of what to do and what to think about and where to go. But I know that so many people either don't know where to go to get a diagnosis, or even once they get a diagnosis, just have no idea where to go or what to do, just as I had no idea either.
So moving on, How would you say that having Alzheimer's disease affected him in his daily life?
Oh, it affected everything. Absolutely everything. There were physical limitations, walking, the balance became an issue, his depth perception and his ability to know where he was in space became impacted, and that's when he had to stop driving. He would always say to me he felt like he was in a fog, when he would get allergies, he'd feel it more than I think other people would feel because he just felt really foggy. Um, it clearly impacted his ability to communicate verbally. There'd be times where he just couldn't find words and he would hesitate. He would be searching for a word or sometimes use a wrong word. He just couldn't remember even having a conversation with his daughter. Um, if there was something, let's say she wanted to do, and one day he would say, okay, fine. And the next day he'd say, well, no, I never agreed to that. So that was tough. I remember one day, a couple years after he was diagnosed, I was sitting in our den doing some work on the computer, and he got up and wanted to make a cup of coffee. And we had gotten a Keurig type machine. So I thought, okay, this is pretty simple. It's just a couple things you have to do. And it took him probably close to half an hour to figure out what needed to be done. Although I do have to say, there were very few times when he really showed his frustration. I know he felt it, but there are only a handful of times I can remember him really getting angry that his body just wouldn't do what he wanted it to do, or his brain wouldn't connect ideas and thoughts the way he wanted it to. He still really stayed upbeat and positive for so long. And I'm grateful that that was our experience and that he was able to maintain his sense of humor. And he had sort of a wry sense of humor, always telling puns and jokes. And that never really changed. Even when I couldn't understand what they were, I knew that he was making a joke. So we were blessed in that way. There was one other thing I wanted to bring up, and it's something that most people don't really want to think about or talk about, but I think it's important. He made it very clear that he wanted to be an organ donor, and not just that, but that it was very, very important to him that his brain be studied after he passed away so that they could learn something about the disease and learn whatever they could to make this awful, awful experience better for people in the future and for the next generations. And so we did that. His brain was donated to the Yale Disease Research Center. And, I hope that whatever information they were able to gain from studying his brain is able to help people in the future. And that was not only really important to him, but I think one of the greatest gifts to the world that he was able to do.
Now, kind of going along what we've been talking about so far, are there any lessons that you learned and, I guess you both learned together through this illness experience?
I think there's several things I can think back on. One is just how important it is to laugh, even when things are so awful, you don't know how you're going to get out of bed that day. You don't know how you're going to function. You don't know how you're going to take care of another person and take care of your kids and take care of work and take care of a home. And somebody says something funny, and yet you just roll on the floor laughing. Allowing yourself the chance to do that and remembering it and writing it down. There were just some really hysterical things that would come out of Mark's mouth, or things that would happen that would just completely break the mood. And, it's really important to allow yourselves those opportunities to happen and to appreciate them for what they are. Just funny in the moment, essence of life kind of situations. I think we also learned very clearly that you don't know who's going to be there for you, and you don't know where the kindness and the help may come from. Some people that we really thought we could count on to be there for either him or me or us or our families, and just never could do anything. But then there were people that we didn't even know who stepped up to the plate and were just absolutely there with kindness and love and compassion, who just made a huge, huge difference in our lives.
Now, going off of that just a little bit, how do you think that he would have liked to have been treated by others?
I think he just wanted people to be understanding and patient, um, because he was trying. He was doing the best he could. There was also somebody that he worked with who did not know about the diagnosis and was just very not pleasant, and blamed him for a lot of things and accused him of not carrying his weight, and making this person look bad if he didn't do something that he was supposed to do when he was supposed to do it. Um, and I think if she had known, I would hope that she would have been a lot kinder to him. So, there are things going on in people's lives that you don't know about.
What advice would you give to somebody who has just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's?
Learning what you can about the disease and taking the focus away from the limitations of it to discover what you can do, rather than focusing on what you can't do or what's too hard or too difficult. Whatever it is you enjoy, doesn't matter what it is, there are ways to adapt it so that you still get that enjoyment from it, that it can still be safe. There's always a way. I think don't be afraid to be real about what you're experiencing, about what you're thinking, about what you're feeling. Not being afraid to reach out and ask for help and support. There's no shame in needing some help. We all need help for various things at various times, and it's okay to accept help.
Did you ever talk to a lawyer about granting power of attorney to a friend, a family member, or to yourself to make decisions on his behalf?
We did, actually. That was one of the earlier things that we took care of. We had gone to an elder care attorney and took care of all the documents and whatnot. And I think this is something that people don't like to talk about. They shy away from it because I don't know why. It means something. Well, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, whether you've taken care of your documents or not. So, and in the end, I did have to become conservator for Mark for some Medicaid issues. So it was helpful that we had the documents to begin with. And the other thing was, we both put together a living will. And so our healthcare directives were very explicit about what we both, or rather what we each wanted and what we didn't want. And when it came to end of life care, there were some family dynamic issues going on at the time. And I remember having a meeting with the doctors and family members. And I knew that that was the time to reference Mark's documents so that we would all be on the same page as to what it was he said he wanted, when he wanted it, and when he didn't want it. And thank goodness we had those documents in place, because all they had to do was take them out of the binder. Everybody read them, and then there was really nothing to discuss because it was all there with his signature saying what he wanted and what he didn't want. And my only goal was to make sure that that was observed to the letter. I do think it's really important for people to learn not only to accept help, which is hard. You know, most of us are brought up to be independent and to take care of ourselves. And, you know, if you want it done right, do it yourself. But that's not necessarily true. It's okay to ask for help. And I think even more importantly, it's important to be willing to accept help. Most of us, I don't know, we have this block when it comes to letting people help us. But we have to kind of get over that, because at some point we're all going to need help with something in our lives. And so giving yourself permission to ask and giving yourself permission to accept. You know, let me just share one last thought with you. When Mark was diagnosed, I can't tell you how many people would come up to me and say something to the effect of, you know, God has a reason for everything. Everything happens for a reason. And I remember how angry that made me, because what I really wanted to say is there is absolutely no reason in the world for this beautiful, kind, loving, supportive man to be going through something so awful. So, you know, that was not a comforting statement to me, but I wanted to be polite, and so I didn't really share that. In retrospect, though, when I look at my life now and what I get to do every day is only because of what I went through with Mark. You know, if Mark was never diagnosed and I never cared for him or had these awful experiences, I wouldn't be able to do what I do nearly as well. I mean, I could learn from other people, but having gone through all of this firsthand and really kind of that whole perfect storm of bad and worse and even worse and then even worse on top of it, I think gives me that chance to really provide some of that support and that compassion that was so hard for me to find.